you did some sort of what was it? It was like a competition or something with that billionaire dude.
Oh yeah, the Bigelow essay.
Bigelow, yeah.
Competition.
What was that about?
It was to write a 25,000-word essay on the best evidence for survival of human consciousness after permanent bodily death.
Why did he want to do that?
Well, shortly before he announced the contest, his wife died.
Oh.
And he also had a son and I think a grandson who had died from suicide.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so he had developed, and I think, to be fair, he had an interest in the afterlife going back a long time. He had sort of pushed it off to the side, but at that point in time, his wife had died, his grandson and son had taken their lives, and his aerospace business had become basically, how to put it, the governor of the state of Nevada during the pandemic had declared his aerospace business to be a non-essential business so that the employees he could have kept them on the payroll, I suppose, but they couldn't come into the factory. So he let all the employees go. They were swept up by other companies, and in effect, he no longer had a business.
Oh, no.
So
he decided to do this. That's wild.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a very creative solution.
Oh, it's super creative. I mean, like people that are willing to spend that much money to do something like this, where there's no monetary return, like there's no profit to be found, just out of pure creativity and curiosity.
Right.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And what was how did it work? So how did he pick people to do this? And what was the prize?
Had to fill out an application in order to be qualified to write the essay. He wanted serious people who really understood the field.
Okay.
And as I recall, there were maybe 1,200 people who filled out application forms. Some 200 of them were accepted to write essays.
Okay. And how did you get picked? You wrote out. You filled out an application.
I filled out. Well, here's the interesting thing. I first heard about the competition from Leslie Kean.
Oh yeah.
She
works for the New York Times, right?
Yeah, well, she was a stringer for the New York Times. She'd written articles about UFOs. She had written a book about survival, and she said to me,
survival.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
She has a book called, I think it's titled Surviving Death.
Oh, wow.
Or something of that sort. So she was known. And in fact, now that I think about it, I heard about the essay and I reached out to her. I said, Leslie, you should enter. You just published a book on the topic. And she got back to me and said, no, I'm one of the judges. And then she said, you got to listen to this podcast with George Knapp because Bigelow was asked, who should enter the competition? And he said people like Jeffrey Mishlove should enter.
Who said? George Knapp said this?
No, Bigelow.
Oh, Bigelow said this. Okay.
Yeah, Robert Bigelow said people who have been studying.
Oh, so he was a fan of yours.
This material all their lives.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
All right. So walk me through.
Well, I told you about my experience with Uncle Harry.
Yeah.
That was sort of the beginning of my essay because it changed my life. And what I found in going through the literature is that people who have had profound shared death, near-death experiences often experience profound life changes.
Right.
Example would be Bishop Pike. I don't know if you remember Bishop Pike. This is in the 1960s.
Yeah.
He was the Episcopalian Bishop of California.
Episcopalian Bishop of California. Okay.
Yes. And his son died. His son died of suicide. And he was terribly distraught, and he was in England at the time, meeting with the Episcopalians in England and the English Catholics, and they had a very close relationship with the spiritualists in England. And so his friends said to him, why don't you go and see this particular medium? The name is on the tip of my tongue. And he visited a spiritualist medium who began bringing him very detailed communications from his deceased son, along with the deceased son's godfather, a very well-known theologian. Again, the name is on the tip of my tongue. Yeah. And so convinced him that these are authentic communications. He resigned as Bishop of California so that he could pursue this further.
Wow. Wow.
Another case.
That's profound.
Of a person whose life was changed dramatically, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, very well-known medical doctor who began writing about the stages of death and dying. Yeah. She got into that field. She had this long-standing interest. And there was a time in her life when it felt like it's not going anywhere for her. She was doing workshops and seminars. Right. And she just didn't feel like they were connecting, and she was ready to give it all up. And she was about to tell her supervisor at the University of Chicago that she's going to change her career direction. And as she's sitting there about to speak to him, they're standing in front of an elevator, as I recall, when a woman steps out of the elevator and says to her, "May I walk with you to your office down the hall?" So instead of resigning, she walks with the woman toward her office, and she recognizes, wait, this woman is Mrs. Schwartz. Mrs. Schwartz is the woman who first informed her about the near-death experience. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, simultaneous to Raymond Moody, was writing about the near-death experience. But Mrs. Schwartz had died 10 months earlier. And here she is walking down the hall with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. They get to the office, and Mrs. Schwartz pleads with her, "You must not give up your work. Promise me that you won't give up your work." And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had the presence of mind to say to her, "Okay, I will make that promise, but would you mind writing that down in a little note for me?" And Mrs. Schwartz wrote down the note. Mrs. Kubler-Ross kept that note. And then Mrs. Schwartz walked out of the office. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross immediately stuck her head out the door to see if she could see her walking down the hall. There was no one there.
Yeah. Wow.
And that, another example of a life-changing story.
Right. The one about Elizabeth Crone is pretty bananas as well. Yeah. She's the one who was walking into her synagogue and got struck by lightning.
Yes. Yeah. She became a good friend.
She left her body and said she went to this crazy garden, this ethereal place, and she had a choice to go to the afterlife or to go back to her body. She chose to go back to her body, which is that blew my mind, that story. That's funny part too, where somebody saw her get struck by lightning and they ran to the synagogue and said, "Is there a doctor in the house?" Like everyone raised their hand.
And as I recall, it turns out there was a doctor
who was like the best one, right?
For lightning strikes.
Right. What are the chances of that?
Yeah.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she explained like how she walked in the synagogue and she was like trying to talk to people and get help or whatever because she thought she was hurt, but then she realized that no one was like acknowledging her or interacting with her, and then she turned around and saw her body laying on the ground.
Yeah. And then she noticed she's floating 6 inches above the floor.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's so wild. Okay, so you wrote about this and you ended up winning this whole competition?
Yes.
That's wild. How much money did you win?
$500,000.
$500,000?
Yeah.
Wow. You pay cash? Give you a suitcase full of cash?
It was a check.
After you won this award and you won all this money from Bigelow, after he wrote you the check, what did you have any like conversations with him about this and like And is he trying to explore this further or push the boundaries of this?
Well, he set up an institute called the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies to explore life after death. He invited me to join the board of directors, and but subsequently, I think, he's an entrepreneur. I think he's moving in other directions. He's creating a new foundation that is taking over that institute. So I don't know what's happening. I think I'll have to get back in touch with him. He's been very actively involved in politics this year.
Oh, has he really?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. He was, in fact, one of the early...
He's in Nevada, right?
He's in Nevada, yes.
Okay. Yeah, what were you saying? He's doing what?
He became a DeSantis supporter.
Oh, really?
Yes, he gave millions of dollars to DeSantis, and then he got...
really? That's interesting.
He got fed up.
Why DeSantis, you think?
Well, I did have many conversations with him about it. I think he felt that after the January 6th insurrection that Trump was not a viable candidate.
Oh, and he wanted DeSantis to be president.
Yeah, and then after DeSantis signed the bill to make abortion illegal in Florida after 6 weeks, he felt that was too extreme, and he switched his allegiance to Trump.
He did.
Yeah.
Interesting guy, man. To have that much money and to be willing just to throw it out at all these crazy ideas and crazy, just like dump millions of dollars just into curiosity that's not gonna pay you back. Like all the people with the most money in the world, just seems like they do the things that's gonna make them more money. Well,
I give him a lot of credit. I think that nobody has done more to bring the field of survival research into public prominence.
Right.